Well, hi, friends. It's Trish, and this is the New Age Tour Guide podcast. I want to say up front before you get into this episode, this could very well be a red pill episode. So I want you to be really careful about stepping into this one. I am talking about, you know, in some sense, that all of life is a psy-op. But I'm also going to kind of unpack what I've personally experienced over the last 10 or 12 years and the 15 years prior to that when I was in marketing and media, and the pure number of psy-ops, psychological operations, subliminal, like mind fuckery that I encountered. So what do I mean by psy-op? I mean things that either enhance or impair or distract the working of our mind. That's what I mean by a psy-op. And so I am going to be really candid in this conversation. I'm going to talk about 3 things that I found were playing a disproportionate role in creating mayhem and manipulation in the context of our minds, and 3 things that I feel are really truly disconnecting our ability to find the real meaning in the message. So all of life as a psy-op is going to really come from my own personal journey, the 15 years that I spent in marketing and media, and then the 10 years I spent making my way out of the marketing and the media and unwinding the impact that had on my mind. Reclaiming my mind in many, many ways, from things that I wasn't even really consciously aware of until I was able to look back on some things. The purpose of it was to be able to reconnect with my own mind, with my own, the power of my mind, the power of my mind and the power of my mind when it is working and functioning at its most optimal capacity. And again, I'm going to say that this is a work in progress, but where I am today compared to where I was 10 years ago, very different. Compared to where I was in 2000, very different, right? So I am speaking largely from my own personal experience, but I am going to pepper in things that I have uncovered as I went along, just to be able to give you some things to sort of get grounded into or go and do some research around for yourself. Don't take my word for it. I'm going to give you some pieces and give you some things to go and do a little bit of research around. But I'm going to bring this all back together around this idea of all of life is a psy-op. All of life now, the way that I see the world, I believe that all of life is a psychological operation. It is intentionally designed to lead us down the path of having more control over our own minds, using the power of our minds to be able to create the soul growth that we're looking for. To use the power of the mind and the soul together to create this, quote, new age that I've been talking about. So as I shift from the video portion into the audio portion, I really, really, really want you to tune in, especially with this episode, because it does have the ability to be a red pill and you might not have the capacity or the bandwidth for it right now. It might be something that you need to bookmark and come back to. So let's take a moment and tune in and really listen for what it is that we need to hear today in order to shift our minds and to prepare our hearts and to reconnect with the soul wisdom that will allow us to navigate through the psy-ops and through the psy-op. I want to just jump back and say, I do believe that there is a battle underway on planet Earth. I believe that the battle is nothing like what we've ever seen before. I believe that the battleground is our minds. is our minds, which is why I have felt so compelled to do this conversation. And I've been waiting for the right timing to do this conversation. And it feels like it's the right time right now. So we're going with it. There is a battle going on right now on planet Earth, in our cultures, in our societies, in our nations, in our neighborhoods. And the battlefield is our minds. So that battlefield, or the battle is being kind of waged on a few different fronts, I think, physiological and biological. I think that we are starting to see, starting to understand, and it's, become very prevalent with Robert Kennedy Jr.'s stepping into a role in the United States that is very focused on health and making sure that the things that are making it out into the consumer marketplace are going through the appropriate amount of testing so that we know that they're safe for people. But he's also looking at it more from the perspective of what are the things that are a part of our daily consumption that may not be as beneficial for us. So I think that there is a physiological and a biological impact or component to this quote battle. And depending on where you are in your journey, you might already be familiar with a lot of the sort of additives and whatnot that are being woven into food, and how maybe our water isn't as healthy as it has been in the past, and at the same time, you're starting to play down into the role of, how do I decalcify my pineal gland, right? Right? Because, there's no end of things to understand about how this human body is meant to operate. So there's a physiological and a biological aspect to this battle. I think that's really been making it challenging for our minds to operate at its highest potential. I think that there has been emotional and intellectual aspects of this battle. Intellectual being, how do we determine fake news from real news? And is there even a distinction anymore? Is there anything that can be considered as real news? And I'm going to talk about that very clearly, and a little more deeply in this episode. We're trying to, intellectually figure out what false flags are. And, what does that actually mean, and how does that impact us? We have so much emotional trauma that we're dealing with right now, both individually and collectively. And I'm going to suggest very gently that if you are not looking back over the last 4 years and considering the amount of trauma that has been uh, inflicted upon the human mind, then you are probably more entrenched in the media and the marketing and the messaging than maybe you might have been aware of. Like I said, this is going to be a red pill for some people. I'm trying to do this as gently as I possibly can. But there's another aspect to this battle for our minds, and that's the spiritual aspect. And I'm going to use this in a more grounded way. I think that there has been such a intentional and deliberate attempt and success to get us and keep us focused out there, out there, that we've lost that inherent, innate connection within our own selves, within our own physiological bodies, to sense and to feel and to know what is truth and what is not truth. So all of life being a psy-op, if you think about just the pure purpose, it's to get a hold of our mind. It's to get our mind under the control of our inner operations and not be so influenced by the external operations, so that we can put our mind to work at creating the soul growth that we envisioned for ourselves when we put the whole big soul plan together. Even more so, I would say that it's about getting a hold of our minds and putting it into service to bring forward this quote, new age that's unfolding right now. If we are not harnessing the horsepower of our mind in possibility thinking and seeing the potential and the opportunities, then we will be very likely being steered by outside influences. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about a psy-op. I'll try not to get down the rabbit hole on this one. But I do think that it's helpful when we're having conversations like this to level set the language, like to ground the language and make sure that we're all talking about the same thing. So a psychological operation, as I'm referring to it, is really about the intersection between the mind and the function, the power, the control of the mind. There are some people who will really look at it and speak about it from the perspective of the working of the mind. So a psy-op, all of life is a psy-op. Are we in control of the working of our mind? Or are the millions of psy-ops going on out there in our world influencing the working of our mind? So working of our mind being the mental, the intellectual, the rational, the cognitive abilities, the ability, how we're using our imagination, whether or not we're being able to see through the subliminal, below the surface stuff, whether or not we can read between the lines, so to speak. And that will depend on the level of function and workability in our mind, physiologically, biologically, intellectually, mentally, and spiritually. And are we using the power of our mind to control the activities that we engage in and to really be intentional about showing up and being present and engaging with what this new age is bringing forward? If you look back on the little bit of the history around this term psy-op, definitely comes out of the military culture, definitely comes back to the first instance that I could find that it was written about was back in 525 BC between Persia and Egypt. And the individual who wrote the article basically said it's been known since 525 BC that there was an advantage to weakening the morale and the resolve of opponents using things like psyops, communication. Today, it's probably more better understood as evoking a psychological reaction, a mind reaction, shaping public opinions. And this one I find is really interesting. Shaping public memory. Now, if you're not feeling a little bit terrified, you're probably not human. Because there are moments where if you start to unpack some of this, you will start to feel a little bit of like, holy frickin' frack, what the hell's been going on? And what is going on right now? Right? I've been asking that question all season long. What the hell is going on planet Earth? So the PSYOP has been woven into things like psychological warfare, political warfare. It's been woven into practices of propaganda, and it's been woven into something that has been actually intentionally described as shifting hearts and minds. Shifting hearts and minds, which is why I think it's really important for us to acknowledge that there is some really subtle pieces to these psychological operations that we might not even be aware of right now. And I'm not going to try and profess that I am aware of all of them, but I've taken myself down enough rabbit holes to be aware of enough of them to say that it's more prevalent than I would have ever believed in 2000 when I first started, really unpacking some of this stuff. Some of the other terms that you might be hearing as it relates and these terms are just language, they're just words, they're just phrases, but they all go back to what's at the heart of this there's a psychological operation going on. So if you're hearing terms like psychological warfare or political warfare or propaganda or changing hearts and minds, changing hearts and minds. And even listen back to my intro where I'm saying shifting your mind and preparing your heart. I'm asking you to do that. I'm not trying to do that. I'm not interested in shifting your mind. I'm not interested in preparing your heart. I want you to do that for yourself. But you might also be hearing things like false flags. You might also be hearing white, gray, black pills, red pills. At the heart of the psychological operation, across the board, everything, every source that I ended up looking at really put at the very heart of it was the use of mass communication. Mass communication, whether that's as a device, a tool, a platform, or mass communication in terms of just the breadth with which a message gets disseminated. And if you're on my Telegram with me, if you're in Strategic Souls, or I just renamed it, if you're in Sovereign Souls on Telegram with me, under Marketing Rehab, I'm going to post a little clip that someone else has created that shows you how the breadth of the message can be shared on multiple platforms, but it's all saying the exact same thing. It's kind of a little bit creepy. Anyways, so I'll put that up there for you guys who are in Sovereign Souls on Telegram with me. So at the heart of all of this, there is a there's millions. I wouldn't even try and count the number of psychological operations, psy-ops, that are being run right now on the planet. And I would not even try to point to the number of mass communication tools that have been used to run said psyops. But I will point to two movies, The Hunger Games and The Truman Show. The Hunger Games and The Truman Show, I think, were really incredible examples of how the psyop was run, how psyops operate. And if you watch those movies trying to see how is it being used in our world today, I think you might be really well served by those two movies. Those two movies. Watching The Hunger Games, watching The Truman Show, and entertaining the pure possibility that there are millions of psyops being run right now in culture, in society, across the globe, in your country, in your city, in your neighborhood, in your schools, in your businesses, like your business communities. They're just everywhere. Some of them are intentional, some of them are not. Some of them are not. So the Hunger Games, the Truman Show give you a bit of a sense of, what are you looking for and how might it show up here? But I want to take that and jump into something that I found during my Eat, Pray, Love journey of that really kind of helped me see this very, very differently. Because I went from just, knowing about it. I knew that propaganda had been used. I knew that it had been used. I know that it was still being used. And, I shared, back to 525 BC. It's been used because it's an effective tool for weakening the morale and the resolve of opponents. And so if we're in a battle and the battlefield's the mind, it is a tool that will be used. I've known about countries that have actively and intentionally used propaganda to shape public opinion and to shape public memory. And I have known, even in business, that propaganda is used and it is used in every single aspect of marketing. Sorry, not sorry. It's used in things like public relations, and it's used in things like advertising, and it's used in things like, showing up in sponsored ads and all of those things, right? It's used in corporate reports. It's used in how bios are written. It's used in um, white papers. It's used throughout business. And the one thing that I need to say so that you hear this, I do not believe that all of it is nefarious. Not all public relations or advertising, bios and speech writing and whatever else is nefarious. Not all propaganda, although I'm kind of like wincing as I say this, not all propaganda is nefarious. I think some of it is used to counter nefarious campaigns. The challenge is our minds are completely overwhelmed by trying to determine what is truth and what is not truth. And when I bring this particular season to an end, I'm going to bring an even more controversial conversation forward because I think this is the crux of being able to determine where we are relative to this new age coming in, where we are in terms of awareness. Are we aware? Are our minds ready for the new age? So I've known about propaganda. I've known that countries use it. I've known that business uses it. I also know that not all of it is nefarious, but there is a difference between knowing about something and knowing and knowing. So when you see a sponsored article and it's telling you that it's paid content, it's been produced to serve a specific end aim of the person or the group or the organization that is sponsoring it, you stand half a chance. Your mind is already preparing for, okay, I know what I'm going to consume here is paid. I know to treat that. It's just our minds are so smart in some ways. We know to treat that differently than things that don't have that label on it. Sponsored, paid content. But you come back to this conversation around psyops, and psyops are by nature not transparent. They are intentionally vague, misleading, and even subversive. So I'm not going to try and tell you what to think. I'm not here to do that. I'm not here to tell you even what I am thinking. I'm asking the question, and especially as it relates to US content. Do you know what content is propaganda and what isn't? And how do you know? How do you know? What gives you confidence that that the storyteller, that the information, the facts, the research, the data is based in reality, in true truth? How do you know that the media, the marketing, and the messaging is above board, that it's truthful? How do you know that it's not just part of a psyop? And this is where I really want to get zeroed in on anything to do with US content. And especially if you are in the US listening to this, because you might not know about this. And it would definitely be worth going and doing a little bit of recon for yourself to better understand this. But in the US, as it relates to the content that they put out into the globe, you can find laws in the US that have been passed in their own country to allow that content can intentionally be created and used for the purposes of propaganda and distributed outside the US with the purpose of what? Shaping public opinion, changing the perception of the US. They've been doing it for decades, for decades. But something changed in 2012. And this was the thing that I found that I think took me to a totally different level of awareness around this particular piece, this idea of understanding that there are psyops going on and that those psyops, those millions of little micro psyops, are impacting my ability to navigate life as a psyop, life as a psyop. In 2012, and if you are interested in this, go to my Substack, find this episode on my Substack platform, because I'm going to put some links in that I can't put in Spotify or YouTube, or some of the social platforms. But in this, in Substack, they will be there. There was something in 2012, there was an amendment made, and it was to the Smith-Mundt Modernization Act. Smith-Mundt, M-U-N-D-T, Modernization Act in 2012. This amendment changed the rule for propaganda to be used inside the United States. With this 2012 amendment, every single person that and I'm going to put this link to something called an article that was written by foreignpolicy.com back in 2013. And I have since found multiple other people speaking about this particular amendment, and they're all saying the sort of the same thing. They're all interpreting it the same way. With this 2012 amendment, it meant that in the United States, every form of media, every single form of media, whether it was press, radio, movies, television, social media, every single form of media could be used to spread propaganda legally, if they were so inclined to do so. And it also meant that every entity that might use these media, these platforms, be it politics, business, advertising, journalists, nonprofits, according to this Modernization Act, this amendment in 2012, that they could use these platforms, these media, to spread propaganda legally, if they were so inclined. Propaganda, which is, there's multiple definitions for it. Here's a mashup of what I've got. Propaganda, communication that aims to shape people's beliefs, actions, behaviors. In very simple terms, propaganda equals persuasion. Propaganda equals subtle, subliminal, vague, misleading, subversive persuasion. So, of all of the places, I can't believe I went to Wikipedia to find, but I wanted to go to Wikipedia to see what they had there. So here's what I found on Wikipedia. They said very much the same thing: communication aims to shape people's beliefs, actions, and behaviors. But here's what else they added: it's often biased. It's often misleading. And it's often even false, in order to promote a specific agenda or a specific perspective. Now, depending on when you're listening to this, I want you to consider what you might have just noticed from Mark Zuckerberg and Meta. And he came out with a statement somewhere in around January 2025, depending on when you're listening to this, where he was rolling back fact checkers. And he was basically owning up to the fact that Facebook and Instagram, probably whatever other platforms they have, had been engaging in the practice of censorship, propaganda, persuasion, psy-ops, a psychological operation targeted at influencing or impacting the working of our mind. And this 2012 amendment to the Smith-Mundt Modernization Act made it legal for media and for anybody using the media to spread propaganda if they were so inclined to do so. So if all of life is a psy-op, and I do believe that it is, all of life is us taking sovereign ownership of our mind, controlling the activities of our mind, enhancing the functionality of our natural mind. I'm not talking about technology and the neural link. I'm talking about the workability of our sort of God-given, divine-given mind, harnessing the horsepower of our mind. If all of life is a psy-op, and I do believe that it is, let it be an operation to remove, to readjust, to repair the functioning physiologically, biologically, the workability, the intellectual processing capabilities, the control of our cognitive abilities, and to use the power of our mind to bring our own divinely inspired vision for this new age forward. I just want to thank you for stepping into this conversation. It could have been a red pill, depending on where you are in your journey. Definitely. If this resonated for you, I would appreciate if you shared it with someone in your corner of the world, or subscribe on YouTube, Substack, or Spotify to get future segments. Now, if you are starting to embrace this idea that all of life is a psy-op, and that the intention is to become sovereign souls who are using our minds to bring in this new age, I would love to have you join me on Telegram under, it's a private group for sovereign souls, and reach out to me. Put a link below where you can connect with me to learn more about that, more about, what we're doing inside that group, who it's for, how I'm showing up there. Until next time, I'm Trish Murray, bridging some of the gaps for those who are navigating an incredibly challenging social, economic, political, business, and spiritual landscape, one podcast at a time.